Hello everybody, welcome back to a brand new video. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new, and happy President's Day everybody. So as you know, this is President George Washington, our first president. He was president from 1789 to 1797, and he was also the hero of the American Revolutionary War. He is also the only president to have been unanimously elected twice. Washington had also initially wanted to become just a one-term president. However, many of his advisors had urged him to run for a second term. But after that, Washington decided enough was enough and did not want to run for a third term. Because of the reason why Washington did not run for a third term was because he wanted to set a precedent in which every president would run for only two terms, and in his farewell address, he also warned about the dangers of political parties as well as the United States getting tangled up in foreign affairs. This precedent would be followed by every future president except for FDR, who ran for an unprecedented fourth term. George Washington had support from both the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, who were the two major political parties of the time. In the 1792 election, both Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton had agreed to support George Washington for a second term. And Alexander Hamilton's political views were very similar to Washington's, more so than Jefferson's were. And if Washington were to run for a third term, it would more so be Hamilton's who convinced him to run for a third term. And by this point in time, Jefferson also was also a supporter of George Washington, despite them having different political views. Jefferson and Washington were both from the same state, Virginia, and Jefferson also believed Washington was the only one who could unite Americans. Nevertheless, despite this, Washington did agree more so with Hamilton's political views than Jefferson did, and despite the fact that he considered himself to be an independent, he was very much so a Federalist when it came down to his own ideology. He supported the First National Bank of the United States, as well as a tax on whiskey. And the main thing which Washington supported, which caused many Democratic Republicans to lose their support for him, was his support of the Jay Treaty. And after he supported the Jay Treaty, many Democratic Republicans, including Jefferson, no longer supported Washington as much as they did in 1792. And Washington's but let's say in this scenario, George Washington's advisors had convinced him to run for a third term, and he decided to do so because of the fact that he was afraid of growing divisions in the country, and they believed he was the only one who would be able to unite the country. Unlike last time, the Democratic Republicans would want an opposition candidate to George Washington. However, that opposition candidate would not have nearly enough strength in order to defeat him. Thomas Jefferson would likely be chosen as an opposition candidate by several Democratic Republicans, and in the Electoral College map, this is what the map would be. George Washington would win pretty much every state except for Georgia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, which were Democratic Republican strongholds. And as for the vice presidential race, John Adams would defeat Aaron Burr to become vice president of the United States, with 9 other electors voting for other candidates. So overall, both George Washington and John Adams would be reelected as president and vice president of the United States. George Washington had believed in a policy of neutrality in the war between England and France, and this would cause the Quasi-War, which was a problem which John Adams faced, which George Washington would also have to face in his third term. However, a key difference between Washington and Adams was over Alexander Hamilton. John Adams was not a big fan of Alexander Hamilton and did not like Hamilton. However, Washington had an opposing view and would have consulted Hamilton much more so than Adams did. So, Adams also signed the controversial Alien and Sedition Acts in his term as president. George Washington would have actually also signed the Alien and Sedition Acts. As a private citizen during the 1790s, late 1790s, George Washington supported the Alien and Sedition Acts publicly, so he most likely would have signed the same bill and may even have gone even further than Adams did in the law. Alexander Hamilton would have a much stronger influence over George Washington, and it's unlikely that the same split in the Federalist Party would have occurred that had happened under John Adams. Ultimately, however, George Washington would die in office. In our own timeline, he died in December of 1799 as President of the United States. As the incumbent president, he may have gotten a little bit better medical help, but that wouldn't have been enough for him to survive his whole term. And the president would become John Adams. John Adams would likely have the same support that LBJ had in the election of... So John Adams, he would most likely carry out the same policies that George Washington did, and probably would have come up with a resolution to the quasi-war with France, and most likely the war would have still ended. And he would have the same support that LBJ did after the assassination of JFK, as the nation would be in mourning over the loss of a true hero, George Washington. So overall, the main impact of George Washington choosing to run for a third term would be that the power of the President of the United States would be much higher, and you could see the Federalist Party survive as a major political party for much longer than it actually did. And the presidency of the United States, the executive branch of the United States, would become much more powerful if George Washington ran for a third term, because of the fact that Washington died in office. Some future presidents would use it as justification to serve for life. And because of this future precedent to serve for life, the President of the United States would become much more like a king than an actual president, and we could see much more centralization in the executive branch of the United States. So really, George Washington choosing to step down after 2 terms was a great decision, and we should thank him for it by celebrating President's Day. So thank you everybody for watching this video. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel, and bye.